Hey everybody! Welcome to Friday the 13th, the series. I'm your producer Robert.
And I'm your guest, Jeremiah.
And after a complete, spoiler-filled recap of the episode, we are going to discuss the show you either just learned existed or always wondered how it existed. We promise the answers will be few and far between because we're just here to have some goofity fun exploring a show that, despite or possibly even because of its faults, isn't good and isn't so bad it's good, but is still somehow oddly charming. Let's dive in, shall we? Full disclosure, this is now less a podcast and more some kind of avant-garde performance art project to see just how long we can spend dissecting a single episode of 80s syndicated television. We'll still have all the same segments, but episodes will end where they end, without much by way of natural breakpoints. Think of this show now as the kind of comic book arc that feels a little shaggy when read monthly, but all makes sense when you can binge it as a trade. My old friend and number one film industry guy, Jeremiah, is back from the last episode. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Back from the previous 4 episodes. And the way we're going, he'll probably be around for at least 3 more. If you want a proper introduction to the man, check out episode 12, Faith Healer Part 1. You know, my favorite moment of the previous 4 episodes is when his producing instincts kicked in, and he suggested we try to get the show, and I quote, back on track. Ah, delightful. So I'm turning the keys over to him this go-round, calling shotgun and letting the open road take us where it may. Just a quick past due reminder for any new listeners, whereas he is an ardent fan who has seen every episode at least once, I'm discovering the show episode by episode, so we won't be covering any future plot developments. And if you too would like to discover a show that is eternally Charlie Brown trying to kick that football, for now you can find every episode available to watch for free on YouTube, with a handy link on the Inner Demon Entertainment website. I respect this episode for acknowledging its cast and crew by beginning so slowly I'm actually studying the credits just for something to do. My wanton dig aside, this is a very stylized episode, and that fact is expertly established by this first shot of our soon-to-be antagonist approaching, consulting a newspaper, then strolling up the driveway of a house with a room for rent. Positioned low, the camera pans with him as he passes, frames him in the foreground, consulting the paper, just as the house is revealed in the distance, then dollies in on the for rent sign as he leaves us in his wake. The craft on display is fantastic. My only grievance is that it takes a minute of screen time to tell us a man is interested in a room. Although I retro-suspect this shot was intentionally setting a languid tone for greater contrast with what will happen in a few moments. The only real mistake was insisting the actor carry an entire newspaper, first in his coat pocket, then his hands, then his coat pocket again. A single folded page would not only have been much easier to get back in his pocket, it would have been more believable than watching him glance at the front page's banner headline to double-check a listing for a rental property. Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe this is a murder house, and he's just getting a jump on the competition. Our proto-antagonist is named Frank, but looks enough like Mick Jagger, I'm just going to call him that. He's led in by a beautiful young woman who doesn't balk at his suggestion the house and or yard are in disrepair and would benefit from having a man around. It's hard to be sure what he's referring to since we see zero evidence of domestic decadence, and it's hard to be sure what to make of her indifference. Is it simply a case of the 80s, or the fact she's about to reveal she isn't mortal? Could go either way. Subtle camera moves and balanced compositions continue to barely offset the plotting pace and keep the viewer just interested enough to refrain from switching over to Ron Popeil hawking the pocket fisherman. Case in point, a rare POV shot in which we see the woman's hand opening the door to the room for rent, followed by a push in through the doorway, matched by camera movement in the same direction on the other side of the edit point. However, at 4 minutes in, Jagger has seen a room and discovered a black cape with a giant silver clasp. Full stop. But again, the director puts a little spin on his establishing shot of curious goods with some foreground debris, and it's instantly the best establishing shot of the series so far, and we've seen many. Inside, as Jack recounts all the hoops he had to jump through to track down the cape, which was actually introduced in the previous episode for once, Mickey flashes Ryan the Lion some serious side-eye, as if to communicate, get a load of this guy, doing our whole job for us. Yes, Mickey. As with every explanation on this show, it's tortuous, but it kinda needs to be in order to justify why it takes them so long to track the objects down, given they have a sales manifest with the name, address, and contact information of every punter who graced the curious goods threshold. Ryan the Lion realizes Jack has just volunteered him to pretend to be a prospective renter, to which Jack proffers that he'll pretend to be Ryan's uncle and Mickey his sister. Ryan takes umbrage at the idea he can't be trusted to rent a room by himself, and Jack has the perfect explanation locked and loaded that, of course, it's not about the room but the demonic cape. But let's be honest, Jack would never send Ryan alone to actually rent a room for fear he'd return with a sack of magic beans. While we're here, why are they going as Ryan's uncle and sister? One, Mickey is actually his cousin, so why not go with the truth? And why is an uncle coming to help and not a father? Even more so if Mickey is going to pretend to be his sister. I give up. Based on the following edit, Jagger was staring at the cape the entire time that scene happened. That's not me criticizing. Based on all the speed ramping we're about to witness, it's entirely possible he was stuck in slow motion. When he puts on the cape, he becomes a vampire, I think. His hair is basically the same, but parted, and I think he's supposed to be pale, but it just reads as bad makeup. His clothes are subtly different as well, but it's not distinct enough to climb out of the uncanny valley. It doesn't read as a transformation, it just feels slightly off. When the woman rushes in to swoon over Vampire Jagger, let's call him Vagger. Nope, that was awful. Let's stick with Jagger. When she swoons over Jagger, claiming she's been waiting for the right man, he backs away, claiming he's never had much luck with women, so we might have to revisit no one's favorite recurring segment, 80s gay? The Winchester Mobile must be old enough to have bench seats because Jack, Mickey, and Ryan are sitting three abreast. In a subtle bit of misdirection, Jack informs them the cape is effectively a love potion, causing women to fall in love with the wearer. This is followed by some clever banter that both addresses and obscures the fact Jack has zero reason to believe this encounter will be dangerous. The woman recites a poem suggesting that by adding her blood and Jagger's to the cape's clasp, they can time travel. So it's not really a haunted cape, but a haunted clasp. But first, twist! She has to turn him into a vampire, just like her, and bites his neck. And the needlessly complicated train just keeps chugging along. First, I thought he was now a vampire when he put on the cape and his hair and complexion changed. Guess not. Second, at no future point does even one individual need to be a vampire in order to time travel with the cape, so I got nothing. Third, kinda weird it requires the blood of two people. Could have had two clasps, each requiring a different drop and putting the emphasis back on the cape as a whole, but what are you gonna do? So maybe that wasn't a misdirect about the cape being a love potion because the cat is out of the bag now. And maybe he wasn't supposed to read as pale, but just a man wearing pancake clown makeup and eyeliner with slightly less feathered hair? I don't know. Sorry. But he screams, and Jack, Mickey, and Ryan just happen to be downstairs in an insane stroke of good timing, so they bust down the door and charge up to the bedroom. In a genuinely exciting scene that's a fantastic counterpoint and possible payoff to our slow burn start, our vampiress charges and scratches Mickey and Jack, then seems to hurl Ryan with psychic power, although I wouldn't put money on that. Just as she's about to throttle Jack to death or tear his throat out or something, Ryan the Lion, in a rare display of competence, runs her through with the rental sign from out front that he obtained during a 3-second absence from the confrontation. But it is a fun bow on a tightly edited scene, only slightly undercut by the shots of Jagger leisurely getting back to his feet without a care in the world. And the scene has a false ending when everyone seems to be catching their breath, only for Jack to jumpstart a second action scene when, still pinned under the dead vampiress, he yells for Mickey and Ryan to get the cape, as if there's a rush. Mickey tries, but even though Jagger once again reads as afraid of women, Mickey falls for him regardless, so maybe the cape is a love potion and the clasp an unrelated time machine? Sure, let's go with that. And wouldn't you know it, what with everyone scratched, both Mickey and Jagger's blood drips on the clasp. Well, Wonder Twins power activate, form of time machine. As if he knows what's going to happen, Ryan the Lion makes a beeline for them, and we enter bullet time. Despite running, Ryan moves slowly, which is fine, but in this temporal frame, that means Mickey and Jagger are effectively standing still, which reads more like they're completely frozen than moving slowly. It doesn't help that, when we cut to Jack, he moves and speaks at normal speed, confusing the issue further. Although Ryan's blood never touched the clasp, apparently his contact with Jagger was enough to pull him into its event horizon, and all three of them fade from existence because they've all just traveled to late 19th century London, and the show is now in black and white. Nope, I didn't see that coming either. I know my former partner Hill Street once speculated on whether the series might involve time travel, so kudos to her. Jagger seems startled by the presence of a passing policeman, sorry, Bobby, and runs off. Ryan gives chase, then gives up for reasons I can't be sure of because, to the production budget's credit, a horse and carriage block half the shot. I would point out this Dickensian constable offers no succor, but that actually checks out. More credit where it's due, the show clearly spent the lion's share of its season budget on the production value of this episode. It doesn't matter the exteriors were almost certainly shot in the same Bowery used for the exterior of Curious Goods and any number of modern day scenes. It works for this period episode, and the decision to go black and white, combined with the use of ample heavy shadows, hides many an anachronism, I'm sure. I'll even give bonus production value points by choosing to believe it was a conscious decision to schedule shooting this episode late enough in the year we can not only see the actor's breath, but there's actually a bit of real snow coming down. I pity all the actors and crew, but Ryan is the only one who actually seems cold, despite his giant coat. Ryan fails to purchase a newspaper because he doesn't have a tuppence, proving reversion to the mean is a real phenomenon. Fortunately, Abraham, an aspiring writer, and Caitlin, his wife, sorry ladies, no careers for you back then, take not pity so much as interest in them, but not enough to inquire about Mickey's bleeding face. Abraham and Caitlin mention they're freshly married, and for one horrified moment after Ryan replies that he and Mickey are cousins, I was worried he would mirror that statement. After an effective stalking sequence, replete with match cutting between shots of feet, a prostitute bumps into Jagger and asks what he wants. When he replies, "You've got to help me," she asks, "How?" Lady, you have done this before, haven't you?" I mean, between Abraham and Caitlin offering two strangers lodging, and this prostitute assisting this alley weirdo sans payment, I think this episode has a revisionist agenda regarding Dickensian London. Well, in the last 5 minutes, Jagger has so completely embraced magic, time travel, and his new status as part of the undead, he murders her. Hey guy, did you even consider just turning her? Think I would have used a drop of her blood to return to my own time period, but hey, you're the space-time traversing Nosferatu, mocking the laws of God and nature alike. I'll defer to your judgment. So, Jeremiah, do you want to go ahead and kick this one off? Because at this point, folks at home, I've fully lost control of this show. This is now the Jeremiah Hour, or 3.
Well, sure. No, absolutely. Probably the first point of interest, which is just a weird thing. I don't know the actor who we're first introduced to's name.
The character name is Frank, although I'm going to refer to him as Mick Jagger in my scripted portion.
Yep.
He is played by Tom McCamus, McCamus, who apparently seems to still be working.
I did recognize his face.
Was it possibly from The Sweet Hereafter?
It was from The Sweet Hereafter, and seeing as apparently Sarah Polley has very much become your Kevin Bacon for this show and this podcast, where there's always a connection back to her.
Small world.
He played her father in The Sweet Hereafter.
Yes, his other projects you would not know him from. Case in point, he's actually credited as being part of the Walla group for the movie Sneakers. Now, I point that out for 2 reasons. 1, I like to point out any reference to sneakers. And 2, another actor in the cast was involved with a Loop group, and we'll get to her in just a second. He was also in the FX television series.
Interesting.
That is a discovery I only made researching this episode, but it is absolutely going to be the topic of my next podcast.
Nothing to do with the FX network.
This is FX, the series, based on the 2 movies with Michael Caine and Brian Dennehy. The second of which I saw in theaters and actually became enamored of.
Yeah, those were fun 80s movies. I don't know if they're well remembered.
I guarantee they are not. And I say that as a fan.
Right. Yeah, this sounds like running along with that tradition of converting a couple movies into television shows, like In the Heat of the Night and things of that nature, but obviously not quite as landmark and remembered.
You also would not remember him as Leo in Room. Not The Room, not Tommy Wiseau's film, but Room with Brie Larson.
Well, it's a great movie, so it might be worth rewatching just to actually look for him. I think he did a solid performance in this and did a great job in Sweet Hereafter from what I remember.
And it makes sense. A guy who looks a bit like a rocker cast to play a vampire.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely.
Even before we get to the thing about this episode that everyone talks about, stylistically, the camera work is really phenomenal. Even in the modern day stuff, even in the colors stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree. It seemed like there was a lot more coverage and better coverage than what I would have expected. It seemed pretty well shot and produced. produced?
This episode was directed by Bradford May, who has an extensive list of credits on IMDb. And most of those are for being either a director of photography / cinematographer, but he was also a director for a lot of television, and often he would be the director of photography or cinematographer and the director. He was the director of Darkman's 2 and 3, after Sam Raimi did the first one, of course. He directed an episode of Supernatural. He directed an episode of Smallville. He directed an episode of the Tremors television series. He directed a project that I'm just throwing in here because I love the title, Mask of the Ninja, which is probably the best ninja title I've ever heard.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yep,
There are some good ninja titles, but I think that one beats them all. And then he was the director of 3 episodes of the 80s Twilight Zone television series, but was the director of photography for 28 of the episodes. And finally, the capper, he was the director of photography for the Monster Squad.
Oh, great. Okay. So, yep, all the classic Universal Monster team-up movie.
Yeah.
That's cool. Was he just the director on this episode, or was he also the DP?
Well, funny you should ask, because moments before we started recording, when we had a little delay and I had a few minutes to kill, I looked up the cinematographer for this episode, and that is one Rodney Charters, who is also still working and was not only the cinematographer for this episode of Friday the 13th, the series, he did all 72 episodes.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Jeremiah, let me ask you, does it seem like this series had one cinematographer for its entire run? I couldn't believe it when I saw that, because I love his work on this episode, and probably some others. I mean, he did them all, but I thought this show looks wildly inconsistent week to week. Yes, some of that is differences in production design, wardrobe, hair and makeup, etc. But visually, I just think almost every episode feels like it was directed by an entirely different crew.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely surprised, and I definitely agree. It's not consistent, not by a long shot. Though that might be a really good illustration for the fact that here he is working with a director who is also a DP.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah, that's a big thing with directors. Some are more actor-focused, some are more focused on the editing, some are more focused on cinematography, some are more focused on story and character. That might be an interesting takeaway from that, is an example of like when you work with a DP on his level, how that relationship really does inform the final product in a big, big way.
Absolutely. And I'll go ahead and pause it, and feel free to shoot this down if you don't think it's the case. It seems like they pulled out all the stops, budgetarily speaking, for this episode.
Oh.
Like the lion's share of the season's production budget probably went to making this episode look as period as possible. And although I'm sure they didn't have a longer amount of time to shoot the episode, maybe he was given the budget he needed to pull off some really good looking shots.
I mean, 100%. And there's going to be a time travel element to it where there's costumes and horse carriages and things like that.
It's solid. I was legitimately impressed.
Later on, there's rats climbing around in the foreground or birds flying in the background to be jump scary.
All the animal wrangling on this episode, absolutely.
On a run and gun show like this, when it doesn't really matter, it doesn't really play into the story, but it absolutely plays into the ambience and the feel of what you're doing. A lot of times you'd forsake that just for financial reasons, but here they went with it. And it pays off. It looks great.
And although he wasn't terribly experienced before this, some other projects you might be interested in: Psycho 4, The Beginning.
Interesting.
Sleepwalkers.
Okay.
Tech War. 22 episodes of a show that also exists on the periphery of my awareness, much like Friday the 13th, the series, a show called Mantis.
Yep.
That's an acronym.
Yep, I remember that.
27 episodes of Shameless, 19 episodes of Roswell, 57 episodes of The Pretender, and a whopping 186 episodes, I presume the entire run of 24.
Oh, wow.
So he is no slouch. He went on to do some great things in the entertainment industry.
That's interesting, and that is a big production show. Yeah, that sort of doesn't align with almost anything else on his resume in that sense.
At some point, I would say he crossed over from working in Canada to Hollywood.
So our rock star character, he's looking for a room to rent. I don't know if you had this observation or not, but it stood out to me. He knocks on the door, and when it opens, he has this expression that sort of changes. And I'm not really quite sure what the reading on it is, but it's definitely a choice. It is a strong choice.
Well, I did not notice it. I watched it literally just now as you were speaking, and I see it. I will just chuck it in the bag of decisions that I can't quite decipher for this character and actor. I like him overall, but there are some decisions made that I honestly don't quite understand, and we'll get to those.
Yeah, so this was the first one for me because he opens the door and he finds a woman standing there. But he sort of does this thing where his expression, it's sort of like, oh, this wasn't what I was expecting, or almost like a gulp, almost like a shyness kicks in. I'm not really sure how to read it, but it feels like it's a little bit in one of those veins. And I just wasn't sure why it was there. She's not in a bikini. She's not in some low-cut thing. She's dressed modestly.
Listen, Jeremiah, I don't know what kind of rooms you've rented. I would just say this man struck the mother lode, but okay, I guess it's not up to your standards.
Well, no, I'm not saying, I am saying she's in track, but she's not, if the gag or the bit or the direction is, oh my God, I wasn't expecting a woman quite this.
This isn't SNL making fun of a beer commercial, is what you're saying. Well, we're going to do this wildly out of order, but I feel like the subject has been broached. I was already going to bring up the possibility of discussing him as part of our unrequested ongoing series, 80s Gay. Is that where you're going with this?
I see why, for sure, but no, that's not where I went.
Okay.
There's contradictory things that happen in the episode. Jumping ahead just ever so slightly, when she starts to make a move on him, he's thrown off by it.
Very much so.
And he's a little shy or awkward or scared.
For the folks at home, we're talking roughly Gilligan being asked by Ginger to put suntan lotion on her.
Yes, but it's not like Ginger in her bikini opened the door. I don't think 80's Gay because later, once he has powers, he uses it for that purpose.
And I wasn't thinking it from this example because, again, I didn't even notice this as a reaction. But one thing that I do find charming about the show is that I do think it's a chance for us to see what happens when a production probably moves very quickly and really doesn't have the time to hold the hand of the often inexperienced actors it is cast, and they just have to take a stab at interpreting the material, make a hard choice, and sometimes that lands and sometimes it does not.
Yeah, true. If there's not pre-production time where a director can really sit down, talk to all the actors and really go page by page, beat by beat, discuss what the subtext of all these scenes are, an actor can easily misinterpret how to play something or what the implications of something is.
They can misinterpret the script. The two actors can both have different interpretations that when they get put together without a director having time to guide them, end up being ships passing in the night.
Yeah, and things are shot out of order. Right, so...
Did you have more to say on this moment, or should I talk about her as an actress?
She opens the door. It's full daylight outside.
Wow, you got me.
That's going to come into play here shortly.
I bring that up later with respect to him
Yeah.
in London, but I did not even think about it at this moment.
Make a mental note, folks.
This character actually has a name. Marie Simmons, played by one Diana Barrington. She was in such projects as the Highlander TV series, an episode of The Littlest Hobo, as every episode of this show has to have at least one actor who was on The Littlest Hobo. And she was in the movie Alive, Jeremiah.
Ah, interesting.
I have never seen that movie to this day, despite us both working on a parody short of said film.
Yes. The grand Neil Flynn vehicle.
Alive and well.
Yes.
Just a little fun factoid for us.
When they first come in, she's talking about her husband having passed away and how things are looking a little run down ever since that happened.
Is this when he criticizes the state of her house because it needs a man's help?
Regardless of if you want to go with the 80s gay interpretation or if you want to go with he's a shy guy who wishes he was better for the ladies, is a weird line in either case, like doesn't quite line up with anything, right?
Or the fact that the house looks absolutely flawless.
But the house looks great. I don't know what he's talking about. It is a very nice house. It looks fantastic. And this is me really searching, but I do feel like this must have been intentional. When he is walking up to the house, there's a lot of greenery in the neighborhood. It's a very nice looking neighborhood. When he gets to that specific house, though, I did notice that all the bushes were lacking any greenery. Now, it is winter.
And I'm pretty sure it will snow during future scenes.
Just searching for subtleties that may not even have been intentional or may not have even been there. Is this maybe the one house where all the bushes are dying because it has cursed things going on inside of it?
Entirely possible. I'm not going to accuse you of reading too much into it. I'm just going to point out that it's becoming apparent to me that we watch this show in very different ways. Whereas you try your damnedest to ascribe meaning to anything that doesn't quite align or make sense. I go the other way. And much like I was just talking about the peek behind the curtain that we get of a production that doesn't have a lot of time, is just tossing its actors into the deep end and letting them figure it out. I look at this and think this was a case of the writer wrote one thing, probably a few lines about how he's walking up to essentially the classic haunted house, very gothic, very decayed, and then
They get a location and they don't change the script.
exactly. I don't even hold that against the show exactly. I think it's charming and kind of provides an interesting look into the realities of film production.
Yeah, no, and what you're saying is very accurate to a show like this, and it's very accurate to this show.
I think it's interesting to see what happens when a show just reaches a little beyond its means, and sometimes the cracks show.
Right, yeah. And definitely things like this are happening throughout the series constantly.
And to be fair to this series, I love The Honeymooners, but there was an episode where the set literally came apart live on air one time.
Yes.
It happens.
Yes.
That's what happens when we swing for the bleachers.
No, 100%. There's no justification for her needing a man around this house. And therefore, it really sounds more like a pickup line, but he's so awkward later that it's like, I don't know what it was about.
Yes, this episode answers the question, what if Mick Jagger was socially awkward?
Right. Mick Jagger, but really bad with the ladies.
Oh, man, we've all been dying to know. So they head upstairs, and we spend way too long with him just sort of exploring the room. And then he sees the cape, Jeremiah.
Can I pause right before that? There's a giant mirror in this room. And, there's a lot of emphasis on this giant mirror.
Well, I'm just going to jump way ahead now and mention that...
Go ahead. I think I'm with you.
Well, I don't know about that. In London, there's a moment where, when he's in full vampire form, he runs past a cart where I can clearly see an entire strand of garlic bulbs. And I only find that odd because there are times watching this series where an entire corpse is lost to shadow. But for some reason, I would bet my life that those are garlic bulbs that he runs past. So they seem to really put some emphasis on it.
Interesting. That wasn't where it was going.
Yeah, I know. Nobody in the world would go there except me.
While he's looking in the mirror, she walks right up and stands right next to him. And we don't actually see the reflection. And by that, just to clarify, we don't look at the mirror while she's standing in front of it to know if her reflection's there or not. But based on his reaction, presumably her reflection is showing up. So I don't know if that's a mistake. There's a lot of variations in vampire lore in general. So who knows in this universe whether or not if mirrors are a thing for vampires.
When he first puts on the cape and transforms... ?
Yep.
Does it seem to you like this is, well, back then I guess it would have been blue screen. Do you see a weird something around the perimeter of his hair that almost seems like aliasing?
Oh, interesting. I did not notice that.
I can think of no conceivable reason why you would green screen or do a compositing effect here, but something about it just doesn't look right to me. Maybe it's just the insane bokeh going on where the background is just a blur of color and he's so sharp, but something about it just doesn't feel right.
Maybe this is why I didn't notice it, because this I found distracting. Even based on the curse itself, which we haven't fully gone into yet.
Jeremiah, we've got into nothing. Folks at home, we are 5 minutes into this episode, if that, and we've been recording for 45 minutes. You wonder why we spend 4 hours of content talking about the Cronenberg episode. That's why.
Yeah, no, for sure. I got stuck on the fact that a little bit, why does his appearance change? But even more so, his wardrobe changes slightly.
Slightly.
He's suddenly got the little red tie thing. His white shirt is now, the collar is turned upwards all of a sudden, all because he put on a cape.
It's just different enough to feel wrong.
Yeah, that's where my focus was, and maybe that's why I missed any effects.
Well, don't even get me started on the fact that he seems to have white makeup on. And I mean that.
White makeup and pink lips.
For a show that, if anything, the degradation in quality should render things smoother, I can see that he's wearing makeup.
Yes.
You are not selling me on the fact that he's transitioned to being a vampire, which he hasn't at this point.
No.
If I understand how the cursed item works.
Correct. Why are we... What is the point of any of us connected to him putting on the cape? I don't get it.
Yeah, neither fish nor fowl.
Yeah.
Either go big or go home. Don't have him transform 5%.
Right.
Whew. Why? Why? I'm sorry. Why did he feel compelled? He sees a cape on a bed in this room he's going to rent, and he just puts it on.
To go back to the faith healer, these things just call to you, I guess.
The man is a slave to fashion.
Maybe if he's not all that great with the ladies up to this point in his life, maybe he's looking for that extra piece of flair.
Thank you for not telling the folks at home that, truth be told, every time I've walked into a room with a cape in it, I put it on. So who am I to judge?
Look, some things we just silently acknowledge.
But hey, to be fair, I looked really good in popped collars.
Yeah, no, and it's good with the ladies, that's for sure.
Oh, man. Yes, I like to nag just like this guy. First thing I do is criticize their house. All right. So we skipped over really good-looking establishing shot of Curious Goods. They literally added garbage, and somehow that made it the best-looking shot ever as far as the exteriors of Curious Goods go. And I like casual, indifferent, almost 90s Louise Roby here leaning on, I don't know what she's leaning on, but she's just leaning as Jack and Ryan essentially perform the entire scene. She looks so checked out. I love it. So we've now backtracked and lost ground, but coming back to Frank putting on the cape, that push-in, do you think that was an intentional homage to classic 40s Hollywood horror cinema?
Yeah, I would say so. There's definitely efforts in this episode to specifically homage these classic monster movies.
I bring it up because Robert Eggers recently used it in the film Nosferatu, those types of push-ins to transition.
Yeah.
And we also at this time get the very extreme close-up of the vampiress's eyes, which is also something from any number of Dracula or Nosferatu films over the years, also in Robert Eggers' Nosferatu.
There's not quite as many as you might expect in the black and white stuff. But yeah, I do think they were definitely looking for opportunities to do so, and were trying to sneak those in when they had the time and were able to do it. Did you notice that when our trio is driving, it's full on night, and the sun was out when we established that they entered the room?
Oh, it was a crisp fall afternoon.
I also wondered, having watched these episodes more recently, do they establish what type of car they have or what they're driving?
All I know is it must have a bench seat because they're three abreast in the front.
Yeah. Like, are they in a... It didn't really look like a truck or anything. Like, what is Jack driving here? Why are they all sitting all crunched in like that?
It made filming it very easy because you didn't have to jump around to front seat, back seat. They literally just flipped it 180 and shot them down the entire length of the car one way and then flipped to the other side and shot through the opposite window, and there you go.
But presumably something with front and back seats. which is really the point that we're getting at in all this, is why are these three people crammed in the front?
Exactly. Poor Louise Roby, always in the middle here and kind of just lost to the scene.
Yeah. They are specifically saying they are on hunt for the cape. Nothing else, just the cape.
Just the cape, Jeremiah.
And Jack says, and how exactly Jack knows this, I don't know. One of the powers they expect this cape to have is that it makes men irresistible to women.
Yes, it's a love potion cape, according to Jack.
And they even comment on that. Well, then why are we worried about this widower having it?
Yeah.
Jack is convinced that that is what it does, and that is the main thing. And that does line up with what we see in the show.
Well, does it? Or is Louise Roby ultimately attracted to him because he's a vampire?
That's part of where we're going here. We have a lot about this curse and about this whole episode and the case that they're investigating. I'm not sure if the curse is confused or if there's multiple supernatural elements happening all at once and this is just the collision of this world. But here's the list of things that either seem disconnected but yet all have power.
Worlds are colliding, Jeremiah. If you like the horror genre as much as we do, you can preview the horror comic book Requiem for a Psychopath right now, for free, at the Inner Demon Entertainment website. Imagine a world in which horror film slashers are real. Then imagine a troubled teen bringing one out of retirement to help him take revenge on his bullies. It was written by me and drawn by friend of the show, Stephen Yu. Again, that's Requiem for a Psychopath on the Inner Demon Entertainment website. And, if you dig it, please either review and rate it 5 stars on Amazon, or don't rate and review it at all. Ratings of less than 5 stars send the algorithm into murder mode for some reason. Thanks. I hope you enjoy it. I absolutely want to hear this list because last episode I brought up the reference to Mr. Show with the return of the curse of the creature's ghost, and what a perfect metaphor that is for how this show is always a little too complicated in its scripting for what's actually happening and the time they have to work with.
Right.
Please go on.
Actually, to anyone listening, please go watch that sketch. It's probably on YouTube. I'm pretty sure we're on at least Netflix. So here's what we got going on. We got a cape, which makes women irresistible to men.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, reverse that. It makes men irresistible to women.
Flip it and reverse it. Okay, Willy Wonka.
Yes. So that is established. That seems to be true. And then the mistress of the house says, in addition to that, that it makes them immortal.
With this cape, immortality is found. Yeah, I was so distracted by the fact that it's a poem, I wasn't even really thinking about what she was saying. It has a tune so catchy, a lot of people probably don't listen to the lyrics, but they should.
But he repeats it back later also to Mickey.
Yeah, true.
Then she says, the clasp allows you to travel through time. So the clasp has a separate power
God.
from the cape.
It's two curios in one.
Were they both cursed, or is this some ever separate magic thing that has nothing to do with the antique shop? And whoever got the cape is like, well, this clasp would look great on this cape, and turns out they're both cursed.
Yes, and you know who'd look good wearing this cape and clasp? The haunted doll Vita.
Yeah. But what seemingly is coincidental is the vampire, because none of these things have anything to do with vampires. And this lady is revealed to be a vampire, and she's not wearing the cape.
It was like 1.5 times watching this episode before I just slammed on the brakes and was like, wait a minute, vampires. This episode also establishes that, oh, by the way, vampires exist. Well, what else exists in this reality?
And I don't think they're part of the curse. Like, it's just the coincidence, I guess.
A vampire got her hands on 2 cursed items. It's like more than a collision. It's a 12-car pileup.
And let's go a step beyond that, which you sort of indicated. She says, but first you must become one of us. Us! As in there's a whole...
She hints at a whole clan. I thought the exact same thing. I just now wish she said, it makes you become like us. And also maybe werewolves.
Right.
Because why not?
And possibly a creature that lives in a lagoon.
Yes. Exactly. And maybe mermen exist.
You got
anything else to parse on this bit? I'm not even going to say this scene because, I mean, we still have probably an hour's worth of material before we actually get to them time traveling.
Yeah, I know.
In any sane world, what we've recorded would be a podcast episode. And we're not even through the premise. We're not even through the rushed setup that they used to get to the real plot.
This might literally be cut when we go to the black and white part of the show. Like, that might be week 1 right here. Yeah.
This would be like if someone did like a 2-hour podcast on a James Bond film, but not the entire film, just the opening 10 minutes that's essentially him finishing the previous adventure before he gets to the real adventure for the movie.
Or just the musical section where, like, you're shooting people in this black and white circle.
Basically.
Yeah, it's James Bond shooting a guy in silhouette and then naked women falling from the sky as a song plays. Yes, we've spent 2 hours on practically the equivalent of that.
So despite all odds, our troika show up at the exact moment that Frank has stumbled across this house just looking for a room to rent and has come across a collision of supernatural crap that leaves my brain feeling like this episode slashed through it with a katana, and I'm just waiting patiently for it to slide into 2 a few seconds from now.
Yeah, it is just chaos and coincidence everywhere.
Fortunately, our heroes are downstairs. They hear our vampiress. I'll do her the respect since the character actually has a 2-part name, even though we never learn it. Mary Simmons bites the neck of Frank in order to turn him into a vampire. Can we at least agree that that's what's happening, probably? Even though he's already a vampire.
Yeah, it seems like that's what's happening. But also, since you brought up the fact that her character does have a name, maybe it's also worth mentioning which is a little puzzling. That the backstory of her character is that it was her husband, who has since passed, that got this cape.
Yes, which I presume is part of their overly complicated explanation to kind of show how these objects have drifted over time and aren't so easy to track down, despite having the sales manifest that gives all the names and addresses and contact info for everyone who ever bought anything.
Right. And the show does that quite a bit, and it makes sense. I think it's a fair thing to do. Sometimes it does get overly complicated in some of these situations, but
at this time, you're wondering, was her husband also a vampire?
exactly. I'm wondering, A, was his husband also a vampire? Because seemingly, how could he not be? He's also immortal, based on that being one of two clearly defined traits of the cape. So how exactly is she a widower, and how did her husband die?
Why would a banana want to grab another banana? I mean, that's the kind of question I don't want answered.
Well, good news. This never gets answered. So you've won, both on this show and at life.
Tapping out to this show. They kick down the door. They run up to save him, or at least investigate, I guess, since they don't know Frank from Adam. And they discover a woman with a bloody mouth and fangs tearing into the neck of dear beloved Frank.
And Jack instantly identifies, that's a vampire.
Doesn't miss a beat. Now, Jeremiah, she runs up and slashes Jack and Mickey in a pretty stylized Dalian effect.
Yep.
And then it seems like she uses a psychic force to throw Ryan. Is that just bad stunt choreography and she backhanded him or something? Because he's not bleeding, unlike everyone else.
No, it's like a telekinetic push. Vampire lore is not consistent. And having telepathic and telekinetic power sort of falls into that area where occasionally they have it, sometimes they don't. That's kind of how I took this, but yeah, no, it doesn't seem like it's just bad camera work or bad stunt work.
That was my interpretation. But I just assumed she had a third, as of yet unnamed curio, maybe a brooch or an antique cameo ring or something.
Well, you know, she has a very puffy hairdo, so I assume she got a cursed canister of hairspray at some point.
Bottle of Aquanet.
It's an antique Aquanet. This was an early production sample.
There's a hat pin in there. Yeah.
Yeah, her telekinetic abilities kick in.
You asked me before about, was I shocked by the level of violence on this television series? And I'm not shocked by the amount of blood on her, but it's not bad. Pushing the limits a little bit.
I think so. And also her teeth looked very monstrous.
It wasn't just two long canines. Even the ones on the bottom center seemed all messed up.
So I thought that was pretty cool. And it was an extra step because you could very easily get away with the two sharp ones sticking out a lot. But no, this one leaned in and gave her an even more sinister, hideous, monstrous look with her teeth specifically than what you'd normally spend time on or even think about doing.
So in a 3-second absence from the fight, Ryan the Lion runs downstairs, up the driveway, to the very edge of the property, gets the sign, comes all the way back upstairs, and impales the vampirist from behind.
He's taken a big risk just retreating and running that far to get it. What's funny is the fact that he does that just seems like, well, all right, he's running away. I guess that's it. You know, that seems like Ryan.
Out of the fight.
And Ryan has written this line of being this non-traditional hero. It does seem a little cowardly and incompetent when it comes to the physical confrontations and whatnot. But yeah, the time crunch on that is generous to say the least.
Yeah, it's a nice bow on the scene, but man, does it strain credulity.
Given the strength that we've seen Ryan display in other episodes, but somehow he has the brute force that just literally drive this thing all the way through her chest.
The sheer raw strength, no. I just remember thinking, yeah, that seems about right. The man seems like a born backfighter.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, I was just impressed that he displayed competence for once. I was so distracted by that, I didn't even question the raw physical strength needed to do that.
Well, there you go. Ryan's moving up in the world. He'll be your favorite in no time.
Unfortunately, the show only ran 3 seasons. If it went 4 or 5, maybe.
Give him time. You can never count a lion down.
The show actually uses a deft bit of sleight of hand here where the music dies down, we get a lull in the action, we think it's over, and then Jack, still from the ground, just yells something to the effect of, "We've got to get the cape!" And then Mickey jumps to her feet, the music comes back in hard, and we're just into another action sequence. When really, why, Jack?
Yep.
I mean, Frank wasn't going anywhere. He's just a dude wearing a cape as far as you know. In fact, he might be dead. No, that's not true. He staggered back to his feet, but he's the victim.
From my recollection of the show, I feel like this is a little different in the sense that the person who has the cursed item is sort of guilty of something. Generally speaking, there's something about their character that if it wasn't evil before they got the cursed object, they have such a weakness that the evil comes out.
But in this episode, the objects are owned by a coven of vampires.
Right. But this is a guy who's just in the wrong place at the wrong time, seemingly.
As far as we can tell.
And while the vampire element does change his moral code the way almost all vampire stories end up changing the moral code of whoever gets bitten, the cursed object doesn't really seem to have any moral effect on him. Again, it's like the object is separate from the real evil power that's doing things in this story.
This episode also complicates how we're supposed to feel about him.
Right.
We see one scene where he ditches the cape and takes on full monster vampire form, and then feels his face because he can't see it at that moment. There's nothing reflective. And even if there was, I guess he can't look into it, although the rules on vampires are completely out the window in this episode. But he seems to begin crying and seems bothered by how monstrous he's become.
Yeah.
But he puts on the cape, and when he has the cape on, he does seem wantonly evil. He certainly gives into his temptation to feed, and he seems to delight in tormenting Mickey and sort of dangling that fact in front of Ryan to a degree. I don't know what to make of him in that form. He's the wrong guy in the wrong place, and that part is tragic. But in terms of how the curio works on him, I don't even know exactly what the curio... I know what they do, but they do so many things that I almost don't know the limit of their power or what emotional or psychological effect they're having on the users. Is it a Jekyll and Hyde situation where by using him, he's essentially become a second character that is almost overtly evil, and at one moment he is aware of that and kind of tries to fight back, but then ultimately ends up under the object's thrall? I don't know. It's very confused.
The madam of the house, who's a vampire, isn't wearing the cape and isn't transformed into a monster. So this seems to be a power to cape too. If you happen to be a vampire and then you happen to be wearing the cape, it will stop you from turning into this half bat creature while you're wearing it. But that only applies to him.
You know, when we get to the point where we have to bust out Venn diagrams, Jeremiah, something is seriously wrong.
I think we do. And might need to point to some charts in a slideshow presentation later based on how this is going. Because also, we see Mickey, she cannot resist being drawn to him.
Agreed.
But the reverse is also true. He likewise finds her irresistible.
Does he, or is he just taunting Ryan the Lion?
No. He has dialogue that comes up later on where he is as compelled in a hypnotic way to find Mickey as much as Mickey in a hypnotic way feels compelled to find him.
When he recounts the vampire's poem.
He recounts the vampire's poem, or even before that, when he is like, I gotta go find this woman. He never bites Mickey, which is often where in traditional vampire lore that connection is made. Okay, so then is that the curse? But then also, it's not doing it by either person's will. Neither person might really want this. There are layers to this cape, man, and there's layers to what's going on here with this curse. The other element to all this, and how it differs from most of the cursed objects, is what is the cost of the curse of the cape? Traditionally, with these cursed objects in this series, the cape will give you these powers. It will make your dreams come true. It will make your wishes become reality. But there's usually some type of cost that you then have to pay back to the cape / the devil.
The monkey paw. The devil's ironic punishment.
Right. That doesn't seem to happen here. There's no call from the cape to offer up a sacrifice. The clasp seemingly comes without consequence outside of...
Oh, good. You're bringing up the clasp. Because I was just about to say, we just checked the box for the cape, and then you mentioned vampires.
Yeah.
Now we have to discuss the clasp as its whole separate issue.
Right.
It's insane.
There's no, you get to travel back in time, but now you have to change history to make the world a worse place because of the curse of the clasp.
Shoot the Hitler baby.
Part of it's this episode taking a leap from the normal formula, even more so, as these sort of mixed serialized anthology shows do. This is a case where it's like, you know what, we want to even take a step farther out and be even less about cursed objects and just make this as much of a vampire story as we can. But as a result of that, there's no addressing of even the rules that this show normally has or the formulas that this show normally follows.
No, this episode reminds me a lot of episode 5, which, just to remind you, was the Halloween episode, and thus far the only time we've seen the return of Uncle Lewis since the pilot.
Yep, no, I remember that episode.
And that episode, to me, struck me as wildly inconsistent with the rest of the show, which is a ridiculous statement because it was episode 5. But that episode and this episode seem like episodes that if you watched them out of context and only saw these, you probably really wouldn't have a good sense of what an average episode was like.
Oh, no, very true. Very true. And in this sort of mixed of serialized anthology shows, there's always those shows that sort of get put in like that, where they're either more focused on the overall lore and thus feel very different, which I think is sort of where the Halloween episode was. Or, you know what, this week we just want to tell a story that's so different that it doesn't really quite fit in to the formula that we normally follow. You're almost hindered by the fact that this show is about cursed objects for telling the story more so than, well, it's just about cursed objects, so therefore we can tell almost any story.
Yeah, or this week we're not going to have a cursed object, we're just monster hunters.
Yeah, we're just monster hunters this time, for sure.
It's like setting up a backdoor pilot for a spin-off show.
Right.
Yeah, well, that'll certainly lead into a discussion, I'm sure, about how this show influenced Buffy and Supernatural and everything else.
Right. For sure.
And that, kids, is how you turn an hour and 45-minute record session into 37 minutes of usable podcast material. And oh, look, we're already 8 minutes into the episode. That means by the very next episode of this podcast, we'll have already reached the inciting incident of the story. Amazing how time flies. If you think this episode isn't kooky enough already, be sure to join us next time when a blood-powered antique clasp adds time travel to the mix. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for listening, everyone. We know you have a lot of choices when choosing a Friday the 13th the Series podcast, and we sincerely thank you for choosing ours. Special thanks to Joshua Romeo for original music and to Stephen Yu for original art. And be sure to check out the Joe on Joe podcast, the only podcast where Joe Schlepsky discusses G.I. Joe. If you want to support our show, you can leave a review and rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. If you want an occasional update on our projects, you can sign up for our newsletter at the Inner Demon Entertainment website. And if you want to complain about social media with us on social media, you can find links on our website. And always remember what Carl said to Frylock. It don't matter. None of this matters. Good night, everybody.
I guess that implies that that's not a power that comes from a vampire. It's a power that, in this case, comes from the cape.
And as we all know, time travel comes from a clasp.
And time travel always comes from a clasp. I mean, everybody knows that.
Every great time travel story has taught us
Yep.
time travel comes from a bedazzled clasp.
Always.
I remember when Marty McFly had to get that clasp up to 88 miles per hour.